Let us all unite and celebrate together the victories won for our liberation. Let us dedicate ourselves to rise together to defend our liberty and unity. Oh, sons and daughters of Africa, flags of the sun and flags of the sky, let us make Africa the tree of life.
You are listening to AU Watch Radio, the news read by Lamin Jai. First, the headlines. 100 migrants have died in a shipwreck off the Libyan coastline. 55 African nations and the African Union are in Beijing, China, for important multilateral and bilateral talks with the Chinese government. The news in detail. 100 migrants have died in a shipwreck off the Libyan coastline today, an aid agency report. 2 rubber boats set off on 23rd October, but one of the vessels deflated and sank, Oxfam says. According to the International Organization for Migration, over 1,800 migrants have died while attempting to cross the Mediterranean Sea so far this year. Many more have perished in the harsh and unforgiving Sahara Desert, AU Watch Media team reports. Meanwhile, the African Union and its members are holding series of talks with the EU to find a way to stem the flow of migrants into Europe. 55 African nations and the African Union are in Beijing, China for.
My dad.
Your dad what?
My dad was one of those boats. He was part of those boats,
We have suffered a lot already. Our young innocent souls are dying. Africa is bleeding every day. Don't you but get up. Believe in your greed and we shall fight. We have suffered a lot already, but God is watching. The people of Africa.
To know what we are doing here, and she will never know. I know she will come here.
Africa.
Fight! She already told me that we have to fight, so don't call her a again. For she is part of us, and she is our family.
The pain is enough. The pain is enough. Listen, I have told you people that several times we cannot stand here feeling sorry for ourselves. We must act. We must do something. Let's bring a class action either to the African Commission or to the African Court. If we fail, then we fail. There is no innocent party in the same of Africa. It will persist when good men and women fail to act.
We have to act. Something must be done. Let's go.
We must act.
I'm sorry for being rude, Ali.
You are listening to AU Watch Radio. This is Maria Stevens with the latest update on a matter in front of the African Court on Human and People's Rights that has attracted international attention. An African NGO calling itself in defense of Agenda 2063 has filed a suit at the African Court on Human and People's Rights, seeking an advisory opinion to decide whether the relatives of citizens of African countries who have drowned in the Mediterranean and died in the Sahara Desert can sue their respective African governments for the crime of neglect and for unbearable social and economic conditions that have forced these citizens to undertake the perilous journey to Europe, leading to their deaths. In defense of Agenda 2063 is also seeking an advisory opinion whether citizens from Africa who have been enslaved whilst fleeing their home countries to Europe because of the poverty and hopelessness in their home countries can bring an action against their respective governments and against the governments where they have suffered the abuse before the African Court for the degrading and inhuman conditions they had to endure. Part of the suit read, we are seeking an advisory opinion from the African Court to decide whether or not the deaths by migrants in the Sahara Desert and Mediterranean Sea whilst escaping poverty and hardships in their home countries in Africa amount to violation of the human rights guaranteed under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And if so, whether the citizens of these countries are entitled to bring cases to seek justice before the court. The petitioners allege that over 35,000 migrants have died since 2013 whilst trying to make the backway journey to Europe. Dates for the hearing was set for 4th November 2017. Stay tuned for more information.
My lords, we want to register our deep appreciation to this honorable court for agreeing to our request to appear in person to present our case. Our request is simple, your lordship. We seek an advisory opinion from this revered and respected court to decide whether or not the deaths by migrants in the Sahara Desert and Mediterranean Sea whilst escaping poverty and hardships in their home countries amounts to the violation of human rights guaranteed under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. And if so, whether the citizens of this country are entitled to bring cases to seek justice before the court. Relying on cases like Hadijatu Mane versus the Republic of Niger, where the ECOWAS court held the state of Niger responsible for failing to protect one of its citizens from enslavement by passively tolerating the practice. We also seek an advisory opinion from this respected court to decide whether or not citizens who had been enslaved while leaving their home countries in Africa to Europe because of the poverty and hopelessness in their home countries can bring an action against their respective government before the court for the suffering and inhuman conditions they have to endure. Thank you, Your Lordship.
Thank you very much. Your Lordship, we do understand that this is not the merit stage of the matter, and we are not presenting evidence in that regard. Your Lordships have seen the pictures. You have heard the stories. You have felt the suffering. You might even know some of the victims. This is a struggle for the soul of Africa, our young people. We know why they are running away. We know what is happening in our own countries. We have seen the faces of helplessness and hopelessness in our own backyards. I tell you, it is not pretty. So we call upon this most esteemed of bodies in Africa to assist our young people. Today's challenges demands that courts innovate. With outward migration taking on transnational dimensions, peace agreements growing more political and elusive will wane. This unique and principled and admired court can be bold and creative in harnessing the capacities and avenues available for the promotion and protection of human rights on this continent. We urge your lordships to find in our favor. We do understand that change, fundamental change, is politically difficult during normal times. But the AU has the opportunities to venture into bold territories. And this court in particular has the unique opportunity to chart that course. Thank you, your lordships.
Breaking news from AU Watch Radio. You are listening to AU Watch Radio, the news in brief. Judgment for the much anticipated case brought by the human rights NGO in defense of Agenda 2063, seeking advisory opinion from the Arosa-based African Court on Human and People's Rights, has been reserved for 24th October 2018. President Donald Trump has apologized to the AU and African nations for referring to them as HH countries. In a statement read out by his spokesperson, he called Africa his best continent, not to be outdone by China. His spokesperson says the president plans to invite all African heads of state and government to the White House very soon.
Thank you, Register of the Court. As I was saying, in accordance with the provisions of Rule 39 read together with Rule 72 of the Rules of the Court, which is applied mutatis mutandis, we will apply the provisions of Part 4 of these rules to the extent that we deem them to be appropriate and acceptable. To determine whether the court has personal jurisdiction, the court has to satisfy itself that, in defense of Agenda 2063, is one of the entities contemplated under Article 4 of the Protocol to request for the advisory opinion. We have also taken into consideration the comments and observations of member states of the Union and various amicus curiae. We thank all those parties for submitting their observations. There is a clear distinction between the AU and the organ of the AU. Recognition by the African Commission is different from recognition by the African Union. Article 34.6 of the Court's protocol has therefore effectively banned the Court from entertaining your request. It seems to this Court that since in defense of Agenda 2063 not have observator status before a memorandum of understanding with the AU, it is not recognized by the AU and therefore it is not entitled to bring a request for the advisory opinion before this Court. For this reason, the Court unanimously declares that it does not thus have the personal jurisdiction to an opinion on the present request. Order in my court! Mr. Registrar, please check out what is happening in my court.
Breaking
The
news
court
from
has been
AU
adjourned.
Watch Radio. In defense of Agenda 2063 has lost a case it filed before the African Court on Human and People's Rights, ACHPR. In the suit number 2 of 2017, which in defense of Agenda 2063 had filed, the civil society organization sought an advisory opinion to decide whether or not the deaths by migrants in the Sahara Desert and the Mediterranean Sea whilst escaping poverty and hardships in their home countries in Africa amount to violation of the human rights guaranteed under the African Charter on Human and People's Rights and are entitled to sue their governments before the African Court.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me. I am from AU Watch Radio. How do you feel to have lost such an important case?
Lost? Who said we lost? If anybody lost, it is the people smugglers.
Are you suggesting that you're not disappointed?
Well, look at it this way. We were pushing it. But the only conclusion the court could have arrived at is the one they delivered. You see, the problem is not with the Commission, not the African Union, not even the court. These are institutions which are creations of our own political class. But they can only work with what they have been given. You see, they are, in our own considered opinions, very good institutions doing marvelous work. But also, we can lay the blame on the doorsteps of our elected leaders and political chiefs. But one thing we should all know is that we, the people of Africa, are also part of the problem.
How?
Listen, many of us are complicit in the problems of Africa by our silence and inaction. Too many of us hear stories of migrants dying or see pictures of migrants dying. And by the way, that goes for a lot of issues in Africa. How many of us are even aggravated to the point of taking action? When was the last time you saw citizens of any African country writing petitions to their governments or publicly demonstrating? They will not act. We all have this concept of acting when a family member is involved. Are we all not a family?
many of us in Africa know the wonderful AU 2063 projects? Why is it not part of the programs of many of our governments? Why is AU law and institutions not taught in schools and universities across Africa? And these are issues not only for the government. Our government simply cannot do everything. The great philosopher Plato said, if you do not take an interest in the affairs of your government, then you are doomed to live under the rule of fools.
So what's next?
This is just the start. We are going to pursue an observer status with the AU and also take our advocacy to the AU policy for the repeal of 34(6) of the protocol. If our elected leaders and policy chiefs really meant what they say in Agenda 2063, especially Aspiration 3, an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and rule of law, then definitely they have nothing to be afraid of.
But wait, excuse me, sir, wait. Please, I'm not done with the questioning, excuse me.
Where's the man with the slaves? Where's the man with the slaves? Where's he? I need a lot of slaves this time because I'm going to use them for prostitution. Okay, there he comes. I hope this time he has good ones.
I said, come here. So I am giving him, see, look at her. Strong hands, see the tits. Stand. Strong tits. And I'm giving her out for 100. 100.
I'll pay 200.
200. 300.
400.
400. See, look at her. She is capable of doing anything you want her to do. Look at her properly. 500. 500. 500. 500. Sold. Come on, take this. She cannot be sold. She is part of Africa. Bring her back. Our cries will have no effect if we are crying and dying while killing our own people. How can we strive when our own people have been killed by ourselves? Our very own relatives. The same people that have to protect our rights are killing us every day. The irony of the story is that you are her brother. She is your sister, so let go of the coffins. Free her, for she is part of us. Repel.
I just know that Africans are slaves and they'll be living slaves. I don't have the time.
Come.
I have to go.
You can go. You will have nothing, for you are not a man. You are safe. Africa has a new tone. Africa will be better tomorrow. Africa is our home, and we will make it ours as well. Clap.
Oh, Mama Africa, too much to bear. Children of Africa, rise.
Thank you very much, Your Excellencies, members of the Diplomatic Corps, honorable gentlemen. Particularly, I want to show my deep, deep appreciation to the honorable chairperson of the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, Madam Sonata Maiga, the secretary to the commission, Dr. Mary Maboreke, and all other commissioners for allowing this particular poignant play to go on. My deep, deep appreciation for you to allow this play, madams and honorable commissioners. I belong to a new organization called AU Watch, African Union Watch, which basically tries to hold the African Union and African Union member states accountable to the standards it has set for itself. So once more, my deep appreciation, and I hope that whatever we have seen here will move all of us to take concrete action in the future. The play, as you see, was performed with children from the Nusrat Secondary School between the ages of 11 and 17. So once more, thank you for listening, and I hope whosoever listened to this message will be moved to act and to help the African Commission and even the African Court, or within the African human rights system. Once more, my graciousness and my deep, deep appreciation, particularly to the chairperson of the African Commission. Thank you, madam.